Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's conference call. Thank you all for standing by. At this time, all lines are on listen only for today's conference. During the question and answer portions of our conference today, you will be prompted to press star 1 on your touch-tone phone and record your name at the prompt so you may be introduced to ask your question. Today's conference is also being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect. I would now like to turn our conference over to Mr. Jared Liu. Sir, you may begin.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. Just so you make sure you're in the right place, this is the Alliance for Community Trees webcast on SmartGrowth and urban forestry. There are a few partners who make this all possible, the speakers first and foremost. We also have a couple sponsors, the Home Depot Foundation and the Forest Service, and then all ACT members. So anyone who's on the call today who is not an ACT member, I would encourage you to join. This is one of the benefits of what members support through urban and community forestry is that we can host sessions like this. So today, we're here for a webcast on smart growth in urban forestry. Trees are part of the natural and green infrastructure. Smart growth intersects with urban forestry on many levels: energy cost, crime, livability and sustainability, and more. Urban design is no longer isolated solely to buildings. Trees are part of the natural infrastructure, and their beneficial effects on urban landscapes are becoming better known. Understanding smart growth trends can help you position your projects and programs to better integrate with building and land use trends. Green infrastructure is a term that is appearing more and more frequently in land conservation and development discussions. The first presenter today is Ben Welly, who is a program coordinator for the Trust for Public Lands Center for City Park Excellence. He conducts research on nationwide urban park issues and works with local governments on their urban park strategies, including the confluence of parks and stormwater management, the economic benefits of parks, and the relationship of cars and parks. Prior to Trust for Public Land, he worked in the Twin Cities at the Community Reinvestment Fund and at the Minnesota Attorney General's Office. He has a master's degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Minnesota and a BA in communications from Hamline University. Danielle Glaros is legislative aide to Councilman Eric Olson in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. In 2002, Danielle started working with the state of Maryland in a new office, the Governor's Office of Smart Growth. Through this position, she worked inside state government to influence policy, work on legislative issues on behalf of the governor, and bring together various state agencies and nonprofits in collaborative efforts to change the development patterns in Maryland and revitalize urban areas. Since then, she has also worked as a consultant with various organizations such as Smart Growth America, where she created the National Smart Growth Council. And so now I will turn it over to Ben.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jared. Can everybody hear me okay? Or can you, Jared?
I can hear you. They won't be able to respond yet.
Okay, good. Well, like Jared said, my name is Ben Welly. I'm with the Trust for Public Land. And as you can see from our lead-in slide here, we cover a lot of ground from cities to farms to natural areas. But just to give you a little background, the Trust for Public Land started in San Francisco in the early 1970s, and our mission is to conserve land for people to enjoy as parks, gardens, and other natural places, ensuring livable communities for generations to come. So I think that's also a little bit similar to Alliance for Community Trees in that we are geared towards people and where they live. Today, I'm here to talk about how parks and essentially trees, because there are so many trees and trees are an integral part of parks, how they relate to smart growth, and in particular the economic value of city parks. Before going into the economic value, I just want to briefly mention the different ways that parks can be used for smart growth. And I think first up, TPO was found, and it's pretty known, I guess, that parks are popular. They have voter support for directing public funds to help growth management strategies. Second, parks make for good investment in that they help enhance development and offset higher density housing in smart growth principles. And then third, parks are basically blight fighters and buffers in the fact that they both strengthen the urban core and help protect the fringe from overdevelopment. And just to briefly mention some of the things PPL is doing related to these things, we have a conservation finance program that helps communities create funding streams for parks, including just this last week we were directly involved with passing over $460 million in bond referendums across the country, which were part of much more greater amount of funds. And then second, we have a conservation vision program, which some of what I'm talking to today is relating to, but helping green print communities in setting their conservation priorities and goals, and then assisting core cities and with their strategies on urban parks and how to fully maximize that potential. And then also we have research that we're getting into involving green infrastructure, stormwater, source water protection, the relationship of cars and parks, population density and how that relates to parks, and also an annual survey of the nation's big city park systems on things from acreage to spending to staffing that I encourage you to take a look at on our website, which I list at the end of this presentation. So what I'm basically going to talk about today most is the study that we have recently undertaken, that is, how much value does a city receive from its park system? And we received some funding from the Forest Service to undertake this study that was started from a colloquium of experts across the spectrum on parks to talk about economic value and parks. And what came out of that was a set of ideas for the different things that provide value. And then we took those and went to some economists for the different areas and asked them to develop a model that could be applied in individual communities to measure the actual economic value that parks are providing. There was a lot of research done on this back in the early heyday of parks in the late 1800s leading up to the 1930s, but after the World War II had passed, the attention to cities and parks and research into park trends really basically disappeared. So we're trying to bring that back and give parks their due attention, find out what works, what doesn't, and the different values that parks bring to cities so that the movement will be a strong one. So getting into what these different values are. First, we looked at the environmental value that parks provide through cleaner air. And this is mainly through the trees that are in parks. And we looked at aerial photographs and then judged the amount of trees and how much air is being retained or sort of depolluted, I guess, through the trees. And here's a picture of Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, and you can see just the amount of green and all the trees that are sitting there in the middle of that dense urban environment. And there is some economic value to those trees for the city. And then second, we looked at the environmental value through cleaner water and the retention of stormwater by parks and trees. And basically, we looked at two things for this. Number one is the trees that are holding back and retaining water that falls. And then second, after the water falls from the trees, or the trees become saturated, there's the ground, the actual park land that is holding back water as well. And so parks are holding back all of this water that would otherwise be sent out into a river untreated, or the city would have to pay for hard or soft green infrastructure, wetlands and retention basins and the like to replace those systems. So we're attempting to measure the cost of what it would take to build those that infrastructure to replace the trees and parkland. And then third, there's these more sort of indirectly relate to trees and parkland, but I think there's a definite connection. The third value with parks in terms of economics is the resident value through direct use. And the direct use economists would describe as the value that going to a park to take a jog, to go for a swim, as seen here in San Pedro Springs in San Antonio. How much would those uses cost on the open market? So basically we are counting users, counting the different types of uses, establishing a cost for those uses, and then multiplying that to obtain a value. But there is a definite value that city parks provide in having that available use to the public. And in terms of trees, you can see from this picture here how much trees are enhancing the value of that use. They're providing shade, aesthetics, and much more that is probably not quite seen in just the value of the use alone. Next, we looked at the value through improved public health, and this is possibly somewhat more obvious, but studies have shown that people who are closer to parks and use those parks have healthier are healthier people. So there's a cost savings to that through avoided healthcare costs and the like. And we've looked at the different types of recreation and what kind of health benefit those recreational types provide, and then again multiplied that by how many people are doing it and the cost saved. And again, I think with trees and how that plays a role, trees, like I said, are an integral part of parkland, but we are beginning to also look at what makes a healthy park, in that how can a park be designed inside and outside of its boundaries to maximize use to make people healthier. And I think one of the things we'll be thinking about is how trees and aesthetics really draw people into parks, make them better places, more enjoyable, and people will want to exercise in them with those amenities. Fifth, we are looking at the economic value through tourism. For those of you who are familiar with Millennium Park in Chicago, I think Chicago was deemed the #1 tourist destination for this summer's travel, and people have attributed the fact Millennium Park is there for a lot of this. But in general, this is the amount of tourists that come to a city for park events or just to go to the parks, and the money they're spending outside of those park events, lodging, hotel, eating, etc. And here's a picture. I think this is Austin, Texas. But you can see the amount of people that an event can draw, and the buying power that these people bring. And then 6, perhaps the most persuasive and valuable part of parks is that they increase nearby property values. And numerous studies have shown that parks improve the property value by as much, anywhere from 5 to 20% within about 500 or to 1,000 feet of parks. We've heard through others that even a street with trees will increase, it has been shown statistically to increase the value of that property. So this is a major part of parks. It's very easy to measure it because you can look at a citywide and see how much value is coming from the property next to the parks. And a primary #1 example would be Central Park. And this picture here shows, all of those trees, all of that parkland in the wall of residences that boundary the park, that are some of the most expensive real estate properties in the entire country. Actually, this photo too was used by a condominium real estate company to sell units in this unit that's right here on the left side of the park. That's kind of shiny white. So it's also used in recruiting and advertising. And then lastly is the gain through social capital. And what we're defining as social capital in terms of the economic value of parks is the donation of money to park charities and the donation of time and volunteer labor to parks. This is Patterson Park in Baltimore, Maryland, that shows people helping out, planting trees, volunteering their time. And I think as community tree organizations, many of you may be familiar with the value of volunteerism and the economics that accompany that. So we just want to measure that and show it in our economic study of parks. I think that pretty much sums it up, and I'm at my 15-minute mark, so I will leave it at that. But I do want to encourage people to visit our website, the www.centerforcityparkexcellence.org. The link is right here. And also tpl.org. And please peruse our publications list that has lots of different information on smart growth, economic benefits, and the like. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Ben. And can the operator open the lines, please?
Certainly. At this time, if you'd like to ask a question regarding this portion of our conference, please press *1 and record your name at the prompt so I may introduce you to ask your question. Once again, please press *1 and record your name at this time if you would like to ask a question. One moment, please, for any questions.
And to all attendees, you can ask a question either through the operator, or you can type one into the question manager, which should be on your screen as well, and in which case I'll come on and ask the question for you. But I'll start off. With a lot of the groups that we work with, Ben, I think we use a lot of the same talking points with the benefits of trees and stormwater management and health and livability of communities and on, and there's so many. And I think for a lot of times the challenge is, how do you really weed out the ones that are the savviest or the most important or going to resonate with which particular audience? So I mean, within that, how do you identify the core 1 or 2 when you're going in to talk with someone, rather than just saying, here are all 10, you pick choice?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think overall the ones that we find most savvy, at least for parks, are overall is the economic spin-off that parks create and the ability for parks and trees to act as a driver for economic development. And in cities, that is more and more the inclusion of parks in redevelopment strategies And and as cities are getting more dense with people, the attractiveness of parks is something that people are more and more interested in the idea of urban life. But the ability for parks to sort of transform and have an economic spin-off is a huge one. And I think related to that, within the economic value study, I think the ability of parks to, when they're good parks, to create the proximity effect of higher property values next to parks is probably the most easily understandable and easily communicable point that we have.
And would that mean that the key players are really at the grassroots level? You're really trying to engage the homeowners who are the same as the voters, or is it more important to get your mayor involved, or is it more important to get the business association or someone else?
Well, I think with our economic value study, which we don't have some real hard numbers yet, but we're working with some test cities, Boston and Washington, D.C., and some cities on the West Coast, Sacramento and San Diego. The thing they're looking for is they want to show the economic value of their parks so they can compete with other city services, so that the budget for the city parks agencies can be helped, and that they show that they have a real value to the city. So in terms of this study, I think a lot of it is geared at political leaders so that they don't underappreciate the value that parks provide, as has been in the past in so many places.
Okay. And if you're a tree organization looking to integrate what you do with SmartGrowth, is there anywhere you would say, there's the low-hanging fruit, like anywhere you could say, for these groups that, don't necessarily do a lot with SmartGrowth, but know that it's something that they want to get involved with? They see from your presentation that, they already are kind of integrated with it. Where's the low-hanging fruit? Where would they start?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think more studies are pointing to the value of trees in smart growth neighborhoods, and just in neighborhoods in general, to retain stormwater and the value that provides. And I think it's an easy measure to apply to both parks and trees. And the stormwater retention value that we're measuring is much greater than the air pollution value. So I guess I'm not quite sure how to answer your question, but the ability of trees to handle stormwater runoff is a huge thing, especially in older cities where the EPA is asking cities that have combined sewers to basically solve that problem and make sure that they don't have overflow of sewage anymore from deluges of rain.
All right. Yeah, that answers my question. All right, so I will turn it over to some other questions now. We have a question here. What advice do you have for creating a strong argument for economic value of establishing very small mini parks, which are smaller than 1,000 square feet, in park-poor inner-city areas?
That's a great question. Actually, our studies that we're undertaking, we have taken a conservative stand in a way in measuring this, and so we've not included parks under 1 acre. But there have been a couple studies out there. One was that because parks have been shown actually to increase property values even in small pocket vest type parks, and community gardens also. I think the key for that is some parks, if they're a bad space, will actually decrease the property values next to them. And so the goal and problem, in a way, of community organizers, nonprofits, cities, is to make those places special public spaces, and ways of programming them, keeping them clean and safe, are very important to having them add economic value.
Great. Does the operator have any questions?
We have no questions at this time, sir.
Okay. Well, I have no more questions than question manager. So
I just would like to add one more thing to that question. That was we actually undertake park equity studies, and the questioner could go to our website to understand more about that. But we look at the distance one can walk to a park, and also the demographics of that area. And if the area is underserved by a park in that they can't walk, within 1/4 mile or 1/8 mile, and they're in a poor area that has been historically underappreciated, that has a greater need for parks, even small ones. So that might be a place to look too. So that's it.
Okay. So we will turn it over to Danielle now, but after Danielle speaks, we'll open up again for questions and answers for either Ben or Danielle. So if you have a question you're still holding on to for Ben, you will still have a question, or you'll still have a chance to ask that. So now we will turn it over to Danielle.
Great. Thanks, Jared. Right, let me just add a little bit more about my background, because I think I'll probably talk a little bit about it throughout the slides. Jared mentioned a little bit about working with the Governor's Office of SmartGrowth and with the national nonprofit SmartGrowth America. Right now I work in Prince George's County for a councilman. And our district actually is an interesting one, and it frames a little bit of some of the discussion, some of the points I'll bring up. Our district is predominantly in what we refer to here in Prince George's County as the developed tier. A large portion of it is inside the beltway that runs around Washington, D.C. So we're a fairly urbanized district. We have 2 metro stations that are poised for redevelopment. We have many older communities, some of which that were developed along trolley lines in the late 1800s. Most of our housing stock was built before 1950, and then we have some newer subdivisions coming in sort of our easternmost portion of our district. And I say that description just to give you some idea of some of the perspectives and some of the types of plans and redevelopment we're doing here in the district. And my role as a councilman is a host of different things, but one of them includes sort of shepherding, revitalization, and redevelopment in the district, and working on encouraging smart growth projects within the district. So let me get started. And I think most people are probably now familiar with smart growth, but I wanted to emphasize sort of 2 points of it, in part because I find that sometimes the terminology is misused. And I think there's 2 key things that have to stick with me on smart growth. One is that smart growth is about investing in places with existing infrastructure, so existing roads, existing sewer and water system. It could be redeveloping a parking lot. It could be within a municipality that, right adjacent to the older city is looking to redevelop. But smart growth is, in essence, investing in places with existing infrastructure. I think the other thing to keep in mind with smart growth is that it's about creating livable and sustainable communities. And so often I find that when I think of livable and sustainable communities, urban forests, urban parks are part of that integration. It's not a separate, distinct piece. Too often in plans that I see, it becomes secondary, and yet it's an integral part of how we think of our community and how we think of some of the great communities that exist in this country and in the world. So those to me are sort of fundamental parts about smart growth. I think people are a little familiar, but I wanted to show some pictures because I think it's really telling about how redevelopment can really encourage urban forests, the addition of trees, the addition of our green sweep, and improving sort of our urban life. And this is actually, there's a series of photos I'm going to show now that are from New Jersey of different projects that have been undertaken and before and after shots. And this one actually, I think, speaks a little to a very small park that was done on a corner. They actually enlivened the side of the row home by removing the billboard, putting some windows on, planting a small park that people can casually stroll to, adding some additional sidewalks, really sprucing up the landscape and adding trees is really, if you look at it, one of the key things that they've done here. This slide actually also from New Jersey is literally a makeover of a parking lot. And as we all know, impervious surfaces, not good for our stormwater management, not good for the health of our streams and rivers. And in fact, what they've done in this sort of visual is add additional park space. You can now see at the end of the street, additional landscape, and I almost want to visualize that there's a green roof buried on top of here because they could definitely do it. In urban forests, I think many of us and previous speakers spoke to this about sort of the economic value of our urban forests and of our parks, but there's also a host of other values. Clearly, forests help us with improving our air and water quality. They slow stormwater runoff. They mitigate global warming. And there's also a whole host of social and psychological benefits. And I think those shouldn't be underestimated. There's something about, I think, our sustainability as a species that's very linked to our ability to, even the smallest of settings, be able to sit in a park or visually see a tree in a small landscape or a gigantic park like you find in New York City. These photos are actually all taken from some of those grand parks that were created and designed, a century ago, in essence. Washington, D.C. has a Rock Creek Park in addition to the mall with a amazing stream that runs through it that on any day someone in D.C. can visit. Grand Central Park in New York City. Our urban planning from a century ago was very savvy in integrating environmental and housing together. And somewhere along the way, I think we lost a little piece of that, and I think that's what smart growth and new urbanism, which I'm sure more and more of you have heard about, it sort of brings those back together again. Fundamentally, in my mind, trees are critical urban infrastructure. They're just as critical as the streets that you're going to put into a development project. They're just as critical as the design of your housing, of the retail you might put on the first floor with office above. They're a fundamental part, and I really encourage people in the community to become experts at looking at plans in their community and different development projects and really pushing these issues. Throughout our whole district, everywhere I go, actually people are asking these questions, whether it's in the wealthiest of areas or in some of our poorer parts of our district. People are interested in seeing green. They're interested in protecting our green space. There's a sense that we're losing rapidly some things that we really value. I'm going to talk a little bit about a few different pieces and then open it up for questions. One of the one of the things that strikes me is that we can really think about turning our gray infrastructure into green. And by gray infrastructure, I mean things like stormwater management, streets, it could be a sidewalk. There's a lot of opportunities to integrate green into our urban environment beyond just sort of a park setting. And these are actually photos, interestingly enough, from Vancouver, but they talk about a few different things. You know, one is a sort of what they refer to now as a country road, where there's a green path sort of in between. Bioswales, which I'm sure most of us are familiar with. Streets where the runoff is designed to go into a green area and then slowly penetrate into the nearby water system. Green roofs, sidewalks, tracks. This photo of the streetcar is actually taken from France. I'm not sure. I think actually in the West Coast they're experimenting a little bit with this, but I think it's a really innovative idea. The picture on the bottom is from a Montgomery Ward building in Baltimore, which was redeveloped and now houses office space and has a green roof. It's actually a LEED certified building. And on the right is, I think most of us are familiar with impervious pavers. What struck me about this, and this is actually a picture also from Europe, is how you can be really clever with sort of the design that you do and the infiltration that you can have. I mean, you could see this in a pretty plaza that could be outside of a building, with trees sort of circulating around it, and providing sort of direct infiltration into the ground below, and a beautiful landscape and amenity. Many people, I suspect, out there are familiar with LEED. It's a standard that was developed by the U.S. Green Building Council. There's a variety of different LEED certifications that buildings can go through. A few years back, a group of partners, the Natural Resources Defense Council, Congress for New Urbanism, and U.S. Green Building Council got together and wanted to do a new LEED certification called LEED for Neighborhood Development. And the idea was really to blend both smart growth, new urbanism, with the LEED, with a green sort of LEED certification process. At the time, there was a lot of frustration and concern in the smart growth community because we were certifying great green buildings, but they happened to be in the middle of nowhere. They weren't. They were auto-dependent, and there was some thinking about, well, what if we can sort of blend this new LEED certification with sort of a smart growth perspective where we're talking about location. And so for many years now, this has been working its way through the U.S. Green Building Council process and will officially launch in 2009. And they're now in the pilot phase. And you can find out, if you just want to Google, you can just Google LEED ND and get the latest on it. But the certification would be both for whole neighborhoods as well as smaller infill projects that complement communities. And they do an evaluation based on sort of three different areas: smart location and linkage, neighborhood pattern and design, and green construction and technology, and actually a fourth one, but it doesn't have as many points, which is innovation and design process. And those first three, about a third of the points are sort of evenly divided roughly between those three. I think what's fascinating about it is when you dig even a little deeper into sort of the criteria that's being developed as this new standard moves forward, and a lot of developers are very interested in this standard, is what's being required. There's a set of criteria that's going to be required. There's a set of credits. And even though green is a sort of separate category, it is intricately contained within the smart location and linkage. There are several prerequisites, including floodplain avoidance, wetland and water body conservation, imperiled species and ecological communities, proximity to water. All of those are required items as part of the larger category smart location and linkages. And I'm really excited to see this criteria come to fruition. I think we're already starting to hear developers who are interested in this type of in being certified like this. And I think it really adds some specificity to what's important for developing sustainable communities. Sustainable communities need schools, they need parks, they need green space, they need a variety of different housing types, a variety of different mixture of uses, and that's really what creates a whole community. I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about something happening here in the county. And it started before I came in, the councilman I work for came into office. But a few years back, the Prince George's County here in Maryland passed their countywide green infrastructure plan. And I know many of you are probably working on something similar. In essence, it established goal and objectives and policies for implementation. It mapped all of our green infrastructure in the county and indicated sort of next steps and directions. It took about 3 years to complete. It was an entire public process. We're a fairly large county of about 800,000 people, so it took a few years to complete. One of the things we're now moving forward in is sort of the implementation phase. So we've done the plan, and now we're working on implementation. And I think this is a really, this is obviously this is a really critical stage. The planning is really important. It needs to be done, but getting the ideas into actual policies is absolutely fundamental. And so that's the stage that the county is in right now and just beginning, actually. I was at a briefing a few days ago. And so in terms of implementation, in terms of getting sort of the green infrastructure and protections that we sort of identified in the plan into policies, we're having to dig deep and look at our subdivision ordinances, which most communities have. What is our stream buffers in particular? How does that maybe differ between the different areas in our county, whether that's a rural part of our county or a very developed part of our county? We have a woodland conservation ordinance that governs how much preservation happens as a development project moves forward. We're looking at revising that and shifting some of the criteria and expectations of developers. There's a discussion on the table about looking at integrating some tree, looking at the tree canopy actually within the entire county and how that is preserved as redevelopment comes in or as new development comes in some of our older communities where there might be pockets of acreage that is left, and we consider that green infrastructure now. How are we preserving that tree canopy? There will probably be some code changes that are necessary as well. The challenges, there's a few challenges ahead, and I wanted to speak a little bit to those. One of the things is the time frame for doing this, and we now are in probably our 5th year of talking about our green infrastructure plan. I'm hopeful that the policies will be implemented in the next year, but it takes time, and so it's important to start, I think, soon. In the case of Prince George's County, our woodland conservation ordinance has not been updated in close to 20 years. It's pretty outdated with what the current thinking is. So it's important to get these processes started. One of the challenges for us is that our county is fairly large, and it's we divide it up between the developing and developed and rural tier. One of the challenges associated with that is how are these policies going to be implemented in each of those tiers? Are they going to be similar? Are they going to be different? Are we going to require the same stream buffers in the developed tier, which is sort of the most urbanized part of our county, or are we going to keep it the same as we would in the other tiers? So those are tough discussions that are starting to happen. Implementation, I find a lot of times this is where we get stuck in general. We have a lot of amazing plans out there, but sometimes they do just sit on the shelves. And so I think it's really vital that folks work hard to get some of these pieces into policies. It's probably one of the greatest challenges. It's much easier to do a plan, even though it might take some time, and there's a lot of steps to it, but the policies is what's really going to make a difference, and are pretty essential to have leaders in moving forward with that implementation. And then oversight. There's a real need, I think, on the local level for community members to be very engaged in the development process, and engaged in commenting on plans that they're seeing, raising questions about how things are handled. Some developers, particularly in urbanized areas, are allowed to do mitigation on an off site. That may be a good thing. It may not be, depending on the circumstances. So there's a lot of sort of very detailed information that's thought about in terms of these. There's a lot of sort of detailed information and materials, I know, to review and to stay on top of, but it's really the citizens' input on this that's absolutely essential. Citizens know their communities, residents know their communities better than any public official ever would, or even any planning person may know. And so their thoughts on these issues and following that development process is pretty important. I'm going to open up for questions, but I did just want to leave with a few different additional resources out there and just highlight them. One, the American Planning Association is working on a document to talk about smart growth and urban forestry, and the links provided here. Every year, the New Partners for Smart Growth conference is held. It varies its location. This year, it's coming to D.C. in February, and it's a great event to get more familiar with smart growth and meet other people in the field. The Congress for New Urbanism, as I mentioned, and their website's here, as well as Smart Growth America. And there's a new publication out, and I wanted to thank Don Staley, who's on the phone here, for pointing me to it. But there's a new City Trees publication out there, and I wanted to include that as an additional resource as well.
Great. Thanks, Danielle. The operator can open the lines for questions.
Certainly. Once again, please press *1 and record your name at the prompt if you would like to ask a question. Once again, that is *1, and record your name at the prompt to ask your question.
And I want to follow up on the last point you made about citizen involvement. If you're a private individual or community organizer, or in this case, a nonprofit tree group, if you're already in a district, let's assume, where the public official is engaged with smart growth, supports trees as part of smart growth, what's some advice that you would offer for making sure that your public official stays engaged? I mean, aside from voting and supporting that public official, what are tangible ways that you can show that this is important for that public official to remain engaged on?
It's a good question, Jared. I think probably one of the most important ways is by having. It's a little bit more than just obviously voting. It's more like having direct conversations with the council person and letting them know what the values are of your community. If it's a civic association or an organization, you can always get in and have a meeting with a public official and state your interest in the sort of future of the community and find out more from the council person as to what they see the future of the community as being. So I would really recommend the sort of one-on-one conversation with a council person. It could be done by a letter, but I think it's that sort of one-on-one meeting. You may need, in the case of my council person, he's very progressive, so we're easy folks, I guess, for this discussion. In places where, you know, this is not seen as a priority, I think packaging together the information that was just shared in the earlier presentation on the economic value with some other key items from your community, and you might actually need to do more active lobbying. I would check in your community and find out, do you have a green infrastructure plan? Is your planning department looking to do a green infrastructure plan? What are the regulations that govern environmental issues at your local level? Those are important, sort of just basic information. And then I guess I say one other thing. It's not just about meeting with the public officials. In our county, we're a little unique, which is to say that the public officials have a role in the development process. That's not always the case in other jurisdictions. And so it's really important for people who are interested in this issue to be very familiar with who the planner is for the area and be parties of record on development projects that are moving forward.
All right, we have a question. If trees are such a critical part of urban infrastructure, why do so many local governments not require developers to work in ways that retain large trees? And when mature trees are cut down, why does there not seem to be more guidance about the need to plant large canopy trees instead of smaller, decorative, often non-native varieties?
It's a good question, and I wish I had an easy answer for it. You know, I'm not sure what really happened over the last 50 years with sort of how we think about urban planning and how we prioritize things of value. We have projects that move forward without schools being considered. I've seen projects move forward without parks being considered. And I'm not, I think that's a fundamental problem. I think the solution to it is a demand from the public to make sure that these items are integrated into our development projects. And I think the evidence that was given early on, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but Trust for Public Land, I think, has done some earlier research also on quantifying the value of parks. That information is really fundamental. I think sometimes people don't think of parks as foremost for a project, and yet they are essential. But there is a new wave of thinking that's out there, and I think that is pushing us in a good direction.
Okay. Your question, can we get a copy of your buffer ordinance, and who are the different stakeholders and partners involved in the code change process?
Sure. Our buffer ordinance, you can definitely get a copy of it, and you're welcome to. My email was on the first slide, and I know that those are going to be posted on the Community Trees website, so just send me an email and I will get that to you. It's on our stream buffer ordinance. We're going to be, part of the recommendations dealing with our green infrastructure plan are to revise our stream buffer ordinance and to particularly expand its width in the developing and rural tier. So there'll probably be some changes in the future as well. The second question was, who are the stakeholders involved in the implementation process? Is that correct, Jared?
Yes.
I think that probably key stakeholders is we have here in Prince George's County, where I guess a little unusual too, we have a bi-county planning agency. It's actually from Montgomery County and Prince George's County, two counties in the state of Maryland. And it's the Prince George's section of that bi-county agency that's sort of the point on completing the infrastructure plan, and then they have done the first cut at what they would recommend are the policy changes that need to be implemented. Foremost, the agency, it's the planning department. The county council is heavily involved as the legislative body. The building industry is very interested in the green infrastructure, the changes that might happen associated with green infrastructure that might affect their footprint. Obviously, the citizens there will be a public hearing on all of these proposed changes, but the citizens are absolutely critical stakeholders involved in this process as well. And then there's a few nonprofits. Prince George's County does not necessarily actually have a lot of active nonprofit organizations or advocacy groups that lobby, but there is a few sort of local conservation groups and environmental groups that are involved as well.
Great. Does the operator have any questions?
No, sir. We have no questions in the queue.
Okay. Well, we're just about at time, so I will mention that there's ACT's annual meeting is next Tuesday, and some of these issues will be touched on then. And there's also the Partners in Community Forestry Conference. Both are in Baltimore, downtown Baltimore. That one's sponsored by the National Arbor Day Foundation in cooperation with several partners. And Dan Staley, who's on this call and Danielle had mentioned, will also be presenting directly on SmartGrowth at that conference. So I hope that anyone who's on this call who's not registered for one or both of those meetings, if you're interested, we can still squeeze you in. All right, but we will wrap this up. For anyone who came in late, the recording of this session will be available probably in about a week, and I'll send an email around then about that where you can download that presentation from, as well as both presenters' PowerPoints. I would also appreciate if you could take 2 minutes, go out to the link that's posted up on the screen now. It's SurveyMonkey, and just let us know a little bit more about how this presentation went. If you have any follow-up questions, I can take them there. But your feedback would be most appreciated. Otherwise, I want to say thank you very much to Ben and Danielle for fantastic presentations. I think we learned a lot today. And thanks again to the Forest Service and the Home Depot for being the sponsors on this. And get to go out to that link. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That does conclude today's conference call. Thank you all for participating and have a great afternoon.